And Brandon, it is time to end the show. Looking at the last team, the Big Ten West champions from last year, the Wisconsin Badgers. And this one's easy to start off with because this team should be back in action, right? Like, they should be the clear favorite to win the West, only because alone that I look on offense, they're returning 10 of 11 of their starters that played in the Orange Bowl. 10 of them are back. Is this team going to be the all favorite to win the West this year still?
Yeah, absolutely they're going to be.
Like,
I mean, there's...
end the segment. We're done. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Wisconsin. You're gonna win. Good for you. And you still won't make the playoffs.
Ooh.
No, that's
a rough shot.
That's a joke. But here's the thing: is that if you're able to repeat what you did last season, and just absolutely come out and do what you need to do, you should definitely have people talking about you for the playoff. You should. I mean, if everything goes right the way that it should be, if Alex Hornibrook is able to, limit his interceptions, maybe up his touchdowns a little bit, if Jonathan Taylor continues to be the absolute stud that he is, I don't see this team not being in the conversation for the playoff. I just don't. I think that this is going to be something really good. Another great season. And people have compared this offense and this team to the Russell Wilson, Monty Ball season, where they were scoring 44 points a game back in 2011. And that makes for just absolute huge expectations. But expectations that I think this team can certainly meet.
Now, here's a question on the other side. Offense, they should be fine. 10 of 11 starters coming back. I'm going to hit you with the other trick question on the other side. Do you still feel the same way defensively where they're going to have to replace 8 starters? Or is this just going to be a team that's like, defense, what's that? We'll just outscore you.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily going to be one of those. Yes,
I mean, it's not the Big 12. They'll play some defense. They'll play more defense than the Big 12.
It's the Big 10. You have to play defense, I think, to be in it. But
it's a requirement.
It is. It certainly
they put it
is.
on the resume before you come in. Defense, check.
It's a requirement. So Nebraska almost got kicked out after last season. But this is a team where they're going to score a lot of points. We already can foresee that, or should be able to foresee
Looking into that crystal ball.
Yes. Defensively, they're probably not going to be as
stellar
as I was going to say as porous as you might think they might be. But are they going to be as good as they were as they were last year? Losing those pieces, it remains to be seen because you have to fill in the holes. You have to fill in those gaps. But Wisconsin is definitely a team where I'm not worried. But while defense has kind of been the thing the last couple of seasons, I think that there might be a little cause for concern. But because the offense should be so good and is expected to be so good, I think that kind of hides it. Hides the fact that the defense may not be as good as what they've been the last couple of years. And I don't want it to be, well, you're scoring so many points, so who cares about the defense? Because if it came to playoff time, folks, that's not going to be the mindset to have.
Yeah.
Because Clemson tried to have that mindset, and it didn't work this past season.
No, it didn't. Alabama just rolled all over them.
Maybe we'll forget about defense and we'll score. But they forgot to score and they forgot to play defense. So that's where it comes down to. Yeah, you might be able to get away with that throughout the regular season. And when you look at Wisconsin's, when we take a look at Wisconsin's schedule, we can talk about that a little bit more. But when it comes down to it, and you need to get into the playoff, and you do, let's say you're the 4th team and the 3rd team and whatever it might be for Wisconsin, if they have the season that we expect them to have, that's the time when you need to not get kicked out right away. You need to be able to play some defense. You're going to have to play defense against those teams that you'll be facing.
Here's the reason why. First off, Jinx, you owe me a Coke because we both said so at the same time. But here's the thing I'm worried about when it comes to the schedule is I don't think Wisconsin's going to do the same thing they did last year. I do not think they go 12-0 and walk right into the Big 12 or the Big 10 title game. Damn, it's the second time I did that on this podcast, calling them the Big 12. But the reason why I say that is I look at the schedule, and last year, their teams from the East that they were playing in the crossover, Michigan, Indiana, Maryland. Michigan, the only tough one. This year, they get Michigan. This time it's on the road, not at home. They get Penn State on the road. They get Rutgers at home. I think this year, looking at Wisconsin based off of the how much they have to replace on defense, I could possibly see this team being a 2-loss team after the regular season with losses at Michigan, at Penn State. That would still be enough to win the West. That answers that question. I think they win the West. I do not favor Purdue over them, although that's on the road also. I don't favor Northwestern over them, although that's on the road also for Wisconsin. So add that if you want to the toughness of the schedule. Iowa's also on the road. So there's some tough road games this year for Wisconsin that won't be easy wins, but the only ones I'm really thinking will be losses are Michigan and Penn State. The question to me isn't the will they win the West. It's can they compete with the East? That is my question, because last year, they beat the East in the regular season, but Michigan was your toughest opponent, and by that time, Michigan wasn't who we thought they would be. Then you ran into Ohio State, and it's like, ooh, damn, we ran into a real team in the Ohio State Buckeyes. I know they only beat you by 6, so don't get too angry. But this year, I feel like they'll lose to Michigan, lose to Penn State, then play one of them, even Ohio State, in the Big Ten championship. And that to me is really the question of this season will be dictated about what they do against Michigan, Penn State, and maybe Ohio State in 2018.
So you're going to call me crazy, one.
Because you're going to say they're going to win everything?
And think I'm just nuts, two. Which is the same thing.
Undefeated Wisconsin for the national championship. They're going to beat the Dogs in the national championship. Georgia loses to Wisconsin. That's what you're going to say. Or even crazier, Lane Kiffin and Florida Atlantic get into the national title game and Wisconsin beats them. That's what you're going to say. Rematch of last year. I like it. A little crazy, but I like it. Go ahead, though. I'm joking, by the way, for people who can't tell sarcasm. But go ahead.
I do think that Wisconsin's going to go undefeated in the regular season.
All right.
I do think that Wisconsin will go undefeated there.
It's going to be tougher than last year, though.
It's going to be tougher than last year, and the reason why it's going to be tougher is because the road games against the two toughest opponents, the games against the two toughest opponents are on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not having to deal with a team that has Saquon Barkley anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, for that reason alone, Penn State is not as good. I'm serious. While they're still a good team, and they will be a good team, they're not as good. They lost Saquon Barkley.
It's hard to play in Happy Valley, though.
I understand.
It's really
not
hard
always
to play in Happy Valley.
But I get that when you look at Saquon Barkley's departure, you look at everything that went with him. The return yards, the return touchdowns, the receiving yards, the receiving touchdowns, the rushing yards, the rushing touchdowns, and the passing touchdown that came every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you still have a solid quarterback. You still have a guy who you can get really excited about and who can lead your team.
Mm-hmm.
But with the loss of Barkley, you lose a lot. So I look at Wisconsin as this offense has gotten better. Penn State's has lost some.
It's almost like when the Buckeyes lost Ezekiel Elliott. Could you make that comparison?
Yeah.
It'll almost be like when they lost Zeke.
I absolutely think you could. And then when you look at Michigan, while Michigan I do think will be improved from what they were last season, a season that was...
Well, they actually have a quarterback now. They got Shea Patterson.
Yeah, they do. And Shea Patterson, as we've talked about, is a good quarterback, a solid quarterback, and one who I think you can put your trust in as long as there's no injuries. I still have the question mark with Michigan at how good will they be this season. And again, I look at what Wisconsin is. Now, that defense is going to be the thing of question. I'm looking more from the offensive standpoint as Wisconsin can put up points on them. Wisconsin can put up points on them. Defensively, they are going to have to be able to hold their own. That's going to be without a doubt. Mm-hmm. But they could also be one of those defenses, and I'm not saying that they will be, but I'm saying that because the offense is slated to be so good and has so much talent returning, that they could have a bend but do not break defense. Okay. Where we've seen teams do that all the time, where they give up some points, but they never give up that really big play or that conversion that just killed them. They held their own for most of the game, and they kept their team in it. Yeah. I think that's what we can probably expect from the Wisconsin Badgers this season, but I just don't think that they're going to lose any games in the regular season. I don't see it. I mean, in the first 3 games, those are all wins. Mm-hmm. You're on the road at an Iowa team that isn't as good defensively. You're home against a Nebraska team that, Scott Frost said it, we have to fix everything. You're going to win. On the road at Michigan, like I said, if they're going to be better, but they're not going to be great. You play Illinois, and it's sad for Illinois. You're on the road at Northwestern, a team that is going to have a phenomenal defense, but are they going to be able to put up points on you? Because is their quarterback, is Thorson going to be there? Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be the guy? Mm-hmm. Rutgers, again, that's a game that you absolutely should win.
Don't ask Purdue. They lost by 2 last year.
On the road at Penn State, I talked about them. You have no Barkley. You've lost so much production. Again, I'm not saying that when we get to Penn State fans who watch this, they do. Hopefully they didn't. But
let's hope they're like the Florida State fans that'll say, let's get back to this one at the end of the year. I'll prove you wrong, Brandon. They're going to
say that, Brandon, just because we lost one talented guy doesn't mean that you can write us completely off. Well, I'm not writing you completely off because I'm saying that you still have a really good quarterback. You still have good receivers, and you still have pieces there that can be competitive. But I am saying that Wisconsin just has more. So Wisconsin wins that game. On the road at Purdue, while Purdue is, I still think, going to be competitive, I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with the likes of the Badgers. And then you're home against Minnesota, a team, again, still trying to figure it out. So
the thing I'm going to cut you off really quick.
On paper, Wisconsin looks like they should win them.
The thing I'm going to cut you off really quick and just interject Penn State. I know we'll get to them next week, but the big question for them is, all right, you don't have Saquon Barkley. More pressure is now going to be on Trace McSorley, or as I like to call him, McSworley, because he's swole. But there's going to be more pressure on him this year because he doesn't have a guy like Saquon Barkley behind him. The way I see this Wisconsin season is, I said 2 losses, but that's just what I'm thinking. The window is undefeated to 2 losses. I don't think they lose a single game in the division. I think if they lose games, all of them will come from the Big Ten Beast.
You're looking at a completely stacked Wisconsin team. Mm-hmm. Completely stacked Wisconsin team. You look at a team that, because one of their wide receivers ended up injured last season for 5 games or whatever it was, you ended up adding in 4 more new guys who are absolutely incredibly talented. Mm-hmm. I think that just you look at that and you think, that's a great way to start this season. With everything that they built on at the end of last year, you found more productivity from guys who probably weren't going to get the chances. They did get the chances. They returned the guy who was injured, and boom, now you got 5. Mm-hmm. You got 5 great options. Just receiver.
I'll ask you this. If they do go to, let's say they do go undefeated, first off, double question. First off, who are they playing from the Big Ten East? Not a hold you to it prediction, just the right now who you could see winning that division. And this Wisconsin team, if they go undefeated this year and win the Big Ten, do you think they'd be a for sure team to get into the college football playoff?
The team that I think that they'll be playing from the East is Penn State.
Okay.
And that's just an
We'll give our
it's not
playoff
like you said,
later.
it's not a hold you to it, but it's more of a that's how I feel
What's
right
the gauge
now.
right now?
That's
Yeah.
my gut right now. It's Penn State from the East.
Mm-hmm.
And then my thought is Wisconsin will win, will beat them, and Wisconsin will be a legitimate threat to go into the playoffs, to be a team for the playoffs. And I know you guys probably were like, Brandon, screw this guy, but because he was making that dig at us at the beginning. Well, you guys are good. So I was obviously joking at the dig. Well, it kind of did suck last year, but you look at this team, you look at its talent, and you think, my whole thing is why not? Why not Wisconsin?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to give me enough reasons to say why not, than to say, well, why would they? Well, why wouldn't they? Is the number one question. They have a ton of talent. They have question marks defensively, but I think I still don't think it's a dire thing where it's like, oh my gosh, this guy is falling. What are we going to do on defense? We got to find all these guys and fill all these holes and do all this. And who's going to be the next man up? No. I just don't think it's going to be that. You're going to have some different guys. You may have some questions in terms of depth, but they'll figure it out. And you have the offense that will be able to put up the points while they're doing that.
And I can't remember which team you mentioned this on for this preview, but I'm going to use this same point for Wisconsin. Wisconsin, for especially the guys on offense that are coming back, the 10 of 11 starters we mentioned, they're going to remember last year. They're going to remember how they were 12-0, sitting in those college football playoff rankings at number 4, the last team in the rankings. All they had to do was beat a 2-loss Ohio State team, and they would have been in the playoff. In the playoff. And they lost. Those guys are going to remember that, and that is going to be one of the good things for Wisconsin this year, is I feel like this team is going to use that as motivation. Hey, we were one game last year away from the playoff. Like, if they would have won that game, think about it this way. If they would have won that game, so week 14, we had the first 6 teams, Clemson, Auburn, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Alabama, and Georgia. After that weekend, it would have been Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, because they had won the SEC title. Alabama wouldn't have gotten in. It would have been Wisconsin.
Well, a lot of people to this day say that Alabama shouldn't have gotten in.
Ohio State should have gotten in. Many people are saying, well, because they were the next team out. The next 2 teams out were Ohio State and then Wisconsin. But, like, they win that game, they are in that spot. Now, I'm not saying that correlation is there, but I can see how fandom makes you believe this. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some Wisconsin fans out there that are going, we would have won that game. Then look at how bad Clemson played against Alabama. We could have beat them. And then anything could have, like, Alabama won the championship. We could have won the championship. You were not going to beat the Dogs. That's why earlier you thought I was just throwing out Georgia just to throw out Georgia. I wasn't throwing that out because that would have been the national championship last year if Wisconsin could have beat Ohio State. It could have been Wisconsin versus the Dogs for the national championship last year. That's why I brought them into it. I'm throwing some deep ones in there. I'm making you guys think with some of these digs, some of these jokes. Any final thoughts on the Badgers to close up this podcast?
No, I'm sticking by my Wisconsin goes 12-0. They win the Big Ten. They're a playoff team, and then we'll see what happens from there.
So
I'm going with it. I am sticking with it.
So we all know that we'll see if Brandon changes his mind by the time we get to our playoff predictions, where we predict the playoff teams and what we think the national championship will be. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think about your Wisconsin Badgers down below in the comment section. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening. Housekeeping here at the end. Make sure to check out patreon.com/Most Podcast to help support the channel. And also, thank you to Matt for his support. He was on the podcast today. You want to be like him? Check out patreon.com/Most Podcast. You can also get a t-shirt, help support the podcast, and you can rep MVP wherever you go. That store down below in the description as well, or you can get it at mostvaluablepodcast.com, or you can get your MVP each and every day. And then the last thing for housekeeping is that Apple Podcasts and iTunes. I'll get it right one of these days.
Apple iTunes Podcast.
Apple iTunes. Just either one you got. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating for the Primetime Podcast. Make sure to write a little something about why you like listening to us. Because apparently right now, anyone who checks it out just thinks we're a couple of good old boys that just talk about the SEC.
You bring that up every time.
But we don't. We talk
every single time you bring up that comment.
We didn't, because it's the only one. We just did an entire podcast on the Big Ten. So apparently we're not good old boys that just talk about the SEC.
Well,
but people who don't know us aren't going to know that.
He only watched one podcast.
Oh, I know that, but
and was unhappy
Brandon,
with it because we talked about Tennessee.
I get that, but what I'm saying is, someone comes across our podcast, they're gonna think we're good old boys that just talk about the SEC. That's why you guys need to go set the story straight and let them know why you like listening to the podcast. But I want to thank you guys for watching on YouTube. I want to thank you guys for listening on podcast services around the world. And as always, have a good day, everybody.